There's this ceremony in India where a woman fasts for the longevity of her husband. In return, he's supposed to give you gold, right? And so all of my Indian female friends were like, let's go fast. Like, you get gold, right? And I was like, this is hysterical because gold's not really my thing, but like, sure, I'll go fast for the longevity of my husband. And Vade came to me and he handed me this card of what my goal was going to be. And it was a plane ticket to go to church. Because at that point in time, I was often taking an overnight train ride, so 12 to 16-hour train ride, Saturday night to Sunday morning. And if the train was late, I'd be sitting there like, well, sacrament meeting's starting. Well, Sunday school up. Well, church is over. I'm still on the train. And I'd get off, spend 3 or 4 hours, and have to get back on the train and head back. Right? Like that happened multiple times. And so the fact that my husband would buy me a plane ticket to go to church, and then he's like, look, let's start organizing meetings. Like, I have to be in Delhi once a month for business. Let's just organize those meetings to be on a Friday or be on a Monday, and we can go up to Delhi and you can go to church. And so I was really lucky. I also was married to someone who understood that my faith, and not just like my faith as a belief, but my faith as an act, was important to me.
Hey, everybody. You're listening to The Soloists, and I'm Mallory Everton here with my friend Diana Brown. And today we are talking with McArthur Krishna and her husband Ved Krishna about their marriage and how they met. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
It's going to be a hoot.
We are prepared for that and so excited. So I guess just to jump into it, how did you two end up together?
God is how we ended up together.
You guys said before we started recording that you want my version first, so I'm going to take this.
She said here.
We definitely want both versions.
Mine is more exciting. And if I claim it up front. So I was going to go to a TED conference. They were going to hold one in India, and it was going to be a full TED. And I had this very strong feeling that I was going to meet somebody really important in my life. And the feeling wasn't like it was romantic or anything like that. Okay, fine. I'll meet somebody who will be significant in my life. And I took that flight and landed. And then at TED, you continuously meet amazing people, one after the other. And right from the airport, I would be like, is he the person? Is she the person? Is he the person? And that went on for 3 days of amazing people. But I just won't get the answer that this is the person. And then it became almost time to leave. And then suddenly I get a call saying that my taxi is late. So I was like, well, okay. So I end up going to lunch and I see a bunch of musician friends. So I go and sit with them and we start chatting. And suddenly from the corner of my eye, I'm not even looking this side, and I just feel like there's light. And I look at that and there's this woman. And I literally feel like she's walking on light and I couldn't take my eyes off her. And it's just so mesmerizing. And I'm just like, wow, what hit me? And we smile. And I'm like, do you want to sit down? And we just sit for 3 hours after that. We can't, I just can't leave. I'm just like, okay, how long will this woman stay? And we're talking all sorts of things.
We're
in that
going on 13
conversation.
years. So
Yeah.
I've stayed that.
We are talking about all these amazing things and ideas and just life perspective on different things. And it's so interesting that I have this vivid feeling of us being a really old couple walking together on a beach. And I'm like, I just met this woman. What is this? And then she's like, okay, I need to go now. And I haven't even told her that my taxi is waiting for 3 hours or whatever. So I'm like, okay, I'll go drop you to your room where you have to get your luggage. And I walk her to the room and I just have this feeling that I need to gift her something. And in my backpack, I have a book that we had done on my father. And before I gift her, she says, thank you for the gift. And I'm like, this is just my thought, right? So I was like, what? So she's like, oh, thank you for the gift of your time. I'm like, okay. Whew. And then I gave her the gift. And then, of course, that's another story. But I can't go to the taxi after that. I just turn around and I'm like, what hit me? And I have to go. I remember sitting in this open stadium for at least half an hour, just regaining my composure before I can even go to the car. So that was how it really happened. And it's definitely one of the most profound points of my life so far.
Wow.
That's
I'm already kind of blown away.
I know, I'm tearing up a little bit. That's super magical. I have follow-up questions, but McArthur, do you want to share your perspective of the same moment before we get into those?
The one part that came in from my side is we were chit-chatting and we are having this huge conversation about like expansive, like how do you invest your life? What is the meaning of a life well lived? How do you want to feel that at the end of your life you've invested well? I mean, this really expansive conversation.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden I was like, where do you live? What's the weather like? And I was like, I'm asking about the weather. We just had this fabulous conversation and it hit my brain literally like a marquee, like a movie marquee, one of the old fashioned ones that like lays like the name of the movie and the lights. And it
Mhm.
printed across my brain, this will be your life. And I
Mm.
was
You
like,
got to know the temperature.
Yeah. What's the
and I
weather
was like,
like? What's my
this
weather like?
More than that, a West Virginian woman wants to know the lay of the land, as in she wants to know whether it
yeah,
has contours or not.
it was flat as a pancake.
Oh, no.
Anyway, so this will be my life, but I'm a writer and this is never used without a thing that it modifies. So this river, this country, this man,
Mm,
whatever, right? So this, right? And
totally.
there's no more information from the universe. Just this will be your life. And I was like, I'm not really sure what to do with that, right? So we had this amazing, huge conversation with each of us getting wavelengths,
Mm.
messages from the universe. And at the same time, it still took us ages and ages to sort this out because there are some significant differences. And we can get into this, but it's
Yeah.
been the most like that period of time, that sorting period of time was the most cognitive dissonance I've ever experienced in my life. I felt like my brain was being lacerated as I was trying to sort this through.
So we're talking interfaith, but also extremely long distance relationships.
Yeah.
We did some
Totally. And
Brutal.
dating. Yeah.
right. And when you have all of the national differences, that must have been a whole thing.
And things like that still continue to play out, right? I mean, we still have questions about
Of
taxes
course.
and green cards and like
Yeah.
visas and embassies. I mean, like that's still
I
part of our life.
This is the first time I'd heard the term literally Mormon.
Oh, yeah.
It was only a couple of years later that I realized that this is something called McArthur Mormonism, which is very from different Mormonism. As I started meeting more people, right? So it
No,
took
no,
me 2 years
no.
to realize that there is not just one version of
All Mormons are environmentalists. All Mormons believe in
Super feminist.
equality,
feminists,
exactly,
all of us.
equality.
Yeah.
Everybody. The one thing which was common, though, which is what really endeared me to the faith, was that across the board, each person I asked about this idea of that, how do you get answers to important questions in life? They say we talk to God. That
Mm.
was amazing for me. I'm like a born pagan, heretic, heathen. I'm a tree hugger, a fire worshipper, right? I have no brand, I have no alliance. But one thing was very clear to me, that there was a higher force, and that is what I would call it intuition, or I would call it guidance, or I would call it connection or presence. I wasn't surrounded by people, even in India, who believed in something like that. But across the board, and it could be very conservative to very liberal, that was one answer that was consistent, that we talk to God. And I was like,
Yeah,
wow,
that's so
that's such
cool.
an amazing thing.
I'm curious what conceptions of like marriage and partnership you both had at that time. It sounds like as a pagan, heathen, fire worshiper, whatever you just called yourself. Yeah, like what did you anticipate in terms of marriage? Was it even something you wanted in life? Who did you imagine yourself with? Obviously, probably not a Mormon. And then MacArthur, I'm curious to hear about your own journey in like
Yeah.
being open. This must have been such a shock to like have this spiritual experience for somebody who like did not fit the stereotype of a
No, she was always imagining
Mormon
herself
man.
as Mrs. Krishna.
You played that MASH game when you're little, like the mansion, apartment, house, and
Yeah.
list the boys' names. Ved Krishna was always like the top
It
5
was
names
always
on my list.
as a young West
Yeah,
Virginian girl.
exactly.
So for
Right?
me, it was complex because I was married before, and I had a very
Milk and
connected
water.
marriage. Yeah, disconnected marriage.
Mm.
It was just two people living on a parallel lives. So, of course, when you go through something like that, you think that, oh, I wish I could have a partner I could really connect with and do things with. And I was a romantic at heart. If it was possible, it was always in my imagination that would be the case. But just taking a step back, I grew up in an all boys boarding school. So I didn't have much idea or emotional intelligence. I still don't. Uh, about like I'd never really even dated. And then I got married really early, like 21, almost 21. So I was that early, and my ex-wife was 4 years older than me. So a journey that took time to untangle that knot, detangle. So it took a long time for me to come out of that. I couldn't even imagine the abundance that was coming my way. I have to still pinch myself after 13, 14 years. Like this is possible. Like even the
His
possibility.
wife demands connection. Like
Even more than that, somebody I could really like who would love me like the way my wife does. It was beyond my conception. It was not even something that I could imagine was possible. And I'm completely amazed that we can do so many things together. And it's especially interesting because we think of same faith, same culture, and all that. I'm a boy born in a very little Indian town, two crazy parents for sure. And she's a woman born in West Virginia. And
with
again,
completely sane parents.
yeah, completely same parents. So that's different. Imagine growing up in two amazingly different cultures, faith, religions, whatever else you want to put
Life
in there,
experience.
life experiences. So that's the interesting thing about life, right? How you can grow up totally different and still be the same.
Yeah, I'm so struck by how
Yes,
how many
Empath.
clear yes, yes. You have so many clear differences, but from the moment you met, you had these huge, big, obvious, important things in common. Your values and your intelligence and your zest for life, and also deep spirituality or deep connection to the universe, like you were saying. I just think that's worth noting. That's really cool. What about you,
I
McArthur?
know.
What was your sort of view of marriage at that time?
Right? So I went to BYU when I was 17. I graduated from BYU twice. I had people propose to me at BYU. I had someone I loved dearly who was a really quality human, and it was never right. It was never right.
Yeah.
And so I went years. I didn't get married till I was 37. And in fact, I was said to my mom, like, actually, mom, I'm really happy when I was about 35, 36. And she's like, I know. I wish you were a little less happy because then you'd be motivated to do something. But I really loved my life. I was working in a job that I felt passionate about. I owned my own business with some friends, and I was doing good work in the world, and I was traveling, and I have always been a person who really values my autonomy. I had a career and I was bought a house. I mean, like I bought a house as my own person. And it was super interesting because I feel like my heavenly parents are flowing me along this path. And so some of those big moments in that path is one is that I never felt like I was a dreg. I never felt like I was like that someone had to scrape the bottom of the barrel and I was what was left of the barrel. Like the life experiences had taught me, and I had really truly, my mom had taught me that I was truly of worth. So my worth, even as a single person, was never in question. I was solid on this.
Preach.
So that was right. I mean, because that's hard if that's in play
Yeah.
for someone, right? So that was a real gift that my mom gave me, and then some of my life experiences reinforced. And then I'd known some really wonderful men, right? Like I'd said my prayers about whether or not I should marry them and been told no, but like I'd had the option to marry LDS men, and I knew that God hadn't forgotten me. And then I lost a bet, and I had to get on an online dating site, and I had to go on 30 dates. Like that was the like payment that I right? Yeah.
How much time did you have to go on 30 dates? That's so many
I
dates.
knocked it out in 6 months. But like
Okay.
it was something, right? Like
Yeah.
business, I was flying all over America, so I was going out with, like, Colorado and Idaho, I mean, like, California. But after those 30 dates, 29 of the men did not ask me what I did. And it was noticeable because I lived in DC at that time, Washington, DC, and the first question anyone asks you is, "Hey, what do you do?" Especially as a person in their, like, 30s. I was doing stuff, right? And so when the 30th guy asked me, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, you're the first, like, you asked me, right?" And he said, yeah, but like a lot of people don't think it really matters because you're just going to stay home and have kids. And I was like, I'm going to make a t-shirt that says, not an interchangeable uterus. And I'm
Mm,
going to start wearing that to my dates. Right.
mm,
Let's be
yeah.
clear that like, even if that was the trajectory that I expected, because I wanted to have a big family and I wanted to have kids and I wanted to give that my full energy. Like who that person is going to be different. Right. Like you and Diana are both really different people because you've invested your life in different ways. And so what
Mhm.
you bring to partnership and what you bring to marriage would be different, right? So I got a little grouchy. And a friend of mine pointed out to me that I was being a bigot. And she was right. I'd had these data points of LDS men and I started making assumptions. And she said, you would not say this if you were saying Jewish men or Muslim men or something. She challenged me to challenge that thought in myself. And then it was super fabulous because the universe delivered. Like once I really was able to challenge myself and say, pause, like, what are the stories I'm telling myself here? How is this dangerous or not true? Or what are the stories I'm concocting in my head? I went on a big trip with my sisters and I was in Cairo. And in that congregation, I met 5 LDS men who were
Wow.
so wonderful. They were so delightful and talented and intelligent and very oriented towards equal partnership and were just really incredible human beings. And I literally watched my little bigotry story I've been telling myself just get like crossed off, right?
Wow.
And I really felt that was an important step of my journey because when it came to me being with Vade, I needed to not do it in a reactionary way. I needed not to be like, "Bah, a pox on
Mm.
my community," right? Do
Mm.
it in a way that was like, I'm coming from a place of abundance. I'm coming from a place of strength and well-being, right? And so I could choose Vade not because I'm a reactionary to other people or other cultures, and not because I was like, bottom of the barrel, I'm desperate, I must take whoever I can get from even outside of my faith, right? Like I
Mm.
really came to Vade with this like real place of strength. I was happy and healthy and I thought well of myself and I thought well of other people and I was willing to follow God. I don't know, do you want to jump to like pivot to that point? So
Sure,
when I
Mhm.
yeah.
made,
Mhm.
um, I didn't believe he was my person for a number of reasons of significance. And I spent a year fasting once a week. Like Saturday night through Sunday, I would fast and pray and just be like, I'm not sure about this, and I'm not sure about this, I'm not sure about this. And he takes that story a little hard. Right?
Because
She
I always
fasted for a
was
whole year. It was so
I
unclear to her.
yeah, I knew it the way I saw her walk, and I actually told her, now it's just peeling the onion. You'll get there.
Right? Like,
I have to keep peeling,
right?
so at the right time. And I knew my pagan strengths. I could send messages and all of that.
Oh, yes. You had
So
your tools.
we did a bit of that in the middle, where she needed some message, and then we would arrange that
Right?
through the.
That's right. So, okay, he's kidding, not kidding. That's what's funny about this is every time I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm talking about marrying someone who is divorced, which was, like, okay, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying there is, but it just is a different structure than what you expect. And it was going to require that I move across to the other side of the world because my values put family first. And so, ironically, all these other men I had dated who didn't take my life seriously, they took my life very seriously. We were talking about opening a division of my company in India so I could continue that work. But in my upbringing and my theology, family comes first. So the fact that he'd been married before and we had ended up to be my 2 daughters as well, but he had 2 daughters meant that I had to move to India. Like there
Yeah.
was no way around that, right? I'm looking at giving up my house and giving up my business and like moving to the other side of the world. And he's not LDS, right? I remember one night I was on the metro in DC and I'm like talking to my girlfriend about like this is insane and this is insane because I was like vibrating really intensely for that year. Like I could feel like right?
Mhm.
And a man turns around. He looks like he's a portly accountant. You would not expect him to have a romantic bone in his body, and he flips around and goes, "It is all for love."
That's
You are
amazing.
for love, and I was like, "Oh, thank you," right? Like, Appreciate the wait-in.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you, portly accountant. Oh my gosh.
You're so sweet.
We said we spend spirits in different dimensions.
Yes. The portly accountant is a special, the pagans
Yes.
in India
Right?
have a special portal right to them.
You
Yes.
also have the third Nephite in the
I
golden
was
convertible that got sent. That's a whole other story, but like golden convertible, third, like one of the three Nephites story. But so all this,
Okay.
right? And I'm having this like brain and the cognitive dissonance of like, how do I do this? And do I do this? And what's happening here? And what was super interesting is every time I would chicken out and I'd be like, this is too big for me. This is too intense. This is demanding too much of me. I would shut down. Our heavenly parents would deliver a message that was unequivocal. I mean, like literally, I would just get handed these like incredible moments. One of those, I said, like, okay, I understand I'm supposed to get personal revelation for my life, but I don't know if I can do this. And I wouldn't let Vade talk to me. So like we're on a non-talking stint while I try to figure this out. And I said, you have to tell him if we're supposed to keep exploring this option because I can't even feel like I can get a message on this. Like this is just too intense. And I know I'm cheating because I'm supposed to get revelation for me. This is full on cheating. But like, could you tell him? And 6 hours later, my phone rings. And Vade's like, I've just been waiting for you to wake up. I know we're really not supposed to talk, but I just really felt it was important that we connect today. And I was like, sure,
Wow.
let's connect, right? On another time, I was like super intense and whatever, and I prayed about it and I got like handed music in my head. And I'm not a musical person, so I was totally baffled by this. And literally, I was like, what is that? And it was like, lead kindly light, one step enough for me. So then I'm like, okay, God, Father, like, what is the next one step I need to take? And I got told this is the next step. So when I freaked out about the big potential of it, I would get these little baby steps in between that would pull me back onto the path. And that happened for a year.
It's a lot of pagan work that went in.
I really put his like spirits to the test, right? But I feel so grateful for those moments because I think that by the time it came to the point where like I had to announce to all of my colleagues, my business that I was leaving. Like I had so many like gradual stepping stones along the way that gave me the confidence to make that kind of decision, right? That I wasn't just marrying someone, like I was changing my entire life, right?
Yeah.
And so like it was a very big deal.
Yes. Wow.
Yes.
It's
Uh,
just like so magical. There's so much here that's just it's just delicious. It's a very rich story. And I'm curious, so what does your courtship look like? Did you fly to each
yeah.
other?
Europe got a lot of us because it was in the so every 2-3 months, I would come to the US, she would come to Europe, or she would come to India.
He got pulled aside by TSA asking him why he was
He's
coming
coming
to
so
America so
regularly.
often.
Oh,
They're like, excuse me, sir, what's happening here? You're coming here a lot, you know.
And then he pulled out the portly accountant line.
it's all for love.
You know.
It was funny though. I was like, oh yeah, this was a good one. This was actually after
I
she
have
moved
no
to
idea
India.
about what's going to come out of his mouth.
So-
So this
so-
is
So the TSA again, or the immigration officer again, one of these, why are you coming to America? So I said, my wife is American. By then we were married. And I told him that we have a fair trade. We send 10 Indians and import one American. So one American is equal to 10 Indians. So that's the way we exchange. And that's why I have to come each time because I married an American and imported her to
it was
India.
like, get out. Yeah.
That's so
But I
awesome.
it was, we had so much divine intervention. And I want to be really
Yes.
clear about this. Like, I think this is available kind of two parts. I think this is available to anyone who needs it. So don't think this is like something that someone couldn't have, right? If they also needed it. And at the same time, you may not be a person who needs it. So I had another
The
friend of
divine
mine-
intervention. Yeah.
yeah. I had another friend of mine who was like, okay, I've been dating this guy for a year and a half. Like she had some criteria. She wanted to see how they fight. She said, we need to have a big fight before I got married because I needed to know how this would go. Right. Which I actually thought was super smart.
Yeah.
And like, she never got a full confirmation that's where she should be. But she also said, but I didn't really need it because God knew that I could make a decision and I could be wise and I could walk through this criteria. Yeah. And so I think if you pay attention, it is available to anyone. It's not like this is just God thinks we're magic, right? I mean, like, this is available to anyone, and you may not need it. So being aware of, like,
Mhm.
your relationship with the universe and what you need from your heavenly parents. But I don't want someone to, like, listen to this and feel like gypped, like, "I never got that kind of, you know, divine
Mhm.
intervention." I like, you might have, because I was really paying attention, right? Like, I
Yeah.
was sitting on the cusp of insanity all the time, right? I mean, I'm not saying I earned God's responses, I'm just saying I was paying a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And I needed that to give me the confidence to make some really dramatic choices, right?
Right. Yeah, that makes so much sense.
You know, love.
Not me.
Uh-huh.
I appreciate this conversation so much because I feel like there's two parts of me. I've been dating outside the church, and I think for me, it's mainly been a numbers problem. And sometimes I have gotten into that scarcity mindset that you were talking about, right? Like, oh, it just is impossible that it's gonna happen in the church, and, like,
Yep.
every time there's a guy I'm interested in, guarantee all my best girlfriends are always interested in him, and I just a while ago, I was like, "I don't wanna do this. I
Mm.
hate competition. I just wanna cancel myself out of this space." And so I really relate to that story of coming to heal your relationship with your own community that way, and the sense of disappointment of, "Oh, there's no dating prospects," or whatever. But there's this other thing that I'm also really resonating with what you guys are sharing, which is I feel like this is the Mormon in me, like a very, very Mormon part of me that just genuinely believes that we are all children of God and we're all spiritual beings. Like, I just feel like to believe in Mormonism is to believe that we're all living in the same spiritual universe.
We're all on a path back to our parents. Like, we all have the same parents.
Yeah.
We're all
Mhm.
beloved
Yeah,
Mormons.
and I genuinely feel that kinship with people of all faiths or even of people of no faith. I feel like you can feel their souls.
So after I got engaged, my ward at church was incredibly supportive, like amazing. Like they threw me a fabulous bridal shower, like with him on Zoom that he like piped in. They were
Mm.
so incredibly. In fact, I stood up and I was like, I was offering disclaimers. I know he's not a member, and this one member cut me off and said, "McArthur, we know you. Like you wouldn't do this if you didn't feel that like it was God's path for you." And it was so reassuring to know that I was known like that, right? Like they knew who I was at my deep core. And so my community was amazing. But one person said to me, "That's nice for you, but I could never settle
Oh.
Ah,
and marry someone outside," right?
Aw.
And I had a
interesting.
moment where I went blink, blink. And I thought, no, we're not going to let that stand. And I said, following God's will in your life is never settling.
Yeah.
I have been really told. So when it actually got down to the point where I had to decide, like fish or cut bait, on what we were doing, I had the most profound answered prayer I have ever had. It's like the Joseph Smith, like God knew that I knew. It was abundantly clear that I was to marry Vade. And so if this is your path, you are not settling. Like
Mhm.
I do not believe in a God that would punish me eternally for following the will that they told me to follow. Right. And
Mm.
so I think that spiritual clarity was really important, not generally in my community, but for the people here or there who are like
Mhm. Mhm.
settled.
There's so much compassion and grace in the tone of this discussion right now that's coming up for me. It's very understandable that with a sample size of 30, 29 people not asking you about what you did, that's actually way better than the assumptions I often make. I'm like, I went on 2 dates and both these guys did this thing I didn't like, and so I guess that's 100% of men. You know what I mean? But you had, like, pretty good anecdotal data, like above average anecdotal data, and I think there's something really beautiful about the fact that, like, that wasn't enough. That still was not enough for you to make that kind of sweeping assumption that would make the world small and our community small and would make you think less of men and men
Yeah,
from your group, your community. I feel that with what you were saying too, Diana, and what you just brought up about, somebody thinking you were settling, that I don't know that God would work in a way where we would ever assume that we would ever operate with the judgment of others as a way to like live our lives and to pursue partners and to pursue love. It feels like there's something really wrong about I didn't marry this person because I didn't want to settle. And it's like, well, actually, do you think that God feels that way about any of their children?
right,
Do
right.
any of God's children, would that be settling to God?
I was super lucky because I knew some amazing quality men. And simply because they were not the person for me did not change that they were amazing. I could point to these examples and be like, incredible. I'm so glad they're in this world. I'm so glad they'll go on to find other amazing women.
She just
Right.
liked caramel skin, actually. Everything else was passé.
That may have been true.
Listen, it's a beautiful color.
I was like,
It's
careful.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Look at these cheekbones.
Oh, I was gonna ask if we could hear more about what it was like once you got to the point where like, all right, God is speaking, we're gonna do it. What was it like just logistically figuring out how to blend your lives? And what were the value or lifestyle or religious or cultural differences?
So at this point in time, I have divested a 3-story townhouse, right? And so think about all the things I've collected and traveled around the world that I can't carry with me to India. So I started to sell some of them. There's this famous story called Charlie, one of these LDS books, like Charlie dies and the husband like gives away all of her things to like her friends, right? So I felt like I'm still alive but dying, and I was like giving away all my things to like my valuable people, right? And I'm like picking like, which book do I take? Which do I leave behind? I mean, like lots of identity came up for me, right? Like, what is this going to be like? Right. So we're on the plane. Like, this is the plane ride where I stay in India, where I've moved to India. And we're watching a movie. All of a sudden, Vade turns to me and he goes, "Oh, you have help." And I was like, what? Like I am stepping into a situation where I have staff. Right? Just like it hit my brain in that moment that like I was coming to a world that was so incredibly markedly different than anything I could possibly imagine, right? And so I hit this little Indian town and immediately I'm like, okay, I'm a guest in this country, so I want to be sensitive to all the ways I should be a guest in this country, which PS, which parts of your body you cover up is more stringent than even LDS correct, right? And so for the first week, I wanted to do my own laundry because Americans are self-sufficient and we don't need other people to take care of us, right? So then I haul my laundry up to the roof because the laundry machines, I was in a privileged position. I had a semi-automatic washer, which means you have to turn on the water and watch as it fills up because the speed of the water is linked to how strong the electricity is. And the water would go fast or slow depending on how strong the current was. So I'm like turning on and standing there with a book in my hand as I'm like watching my washer fill up, right? And then it fills up and you have to turn off the water. And you have to put your clothes in and then it has to go through the cycle. And you have to come back and you have to physically unplug it to drain the washer. And then you have to stand there again and fill it up again to rinse. And you have to do this 3 or 4 times. And one load of laundry took me 4 hours. And I was like, okay, my American values are not going to work in this system. So literally I had to dig into like ground zero and be like, okay, what actually are my values and how actually does that work in this world? Right. So I couldn't go to church. There was no church where we lived. It was a overnight train ride or a plane ride away. So I was one of the people who'd gone to church every Sunday of my entire life. Right. If I fell asleep on Sunday morning, then I'd ground myself and I wasn't allowed to go dancing the next Saturday night, right? Like I had to go to church and stay awake, right? I had these stringent structures about like how I lived, and all of a sudden those structures weren't available. My mom was like, "How are you going to do this? Like you don't have any church there, you don't have ministering sisters, you don't have a calling." And I was like, "I have the internet sometimes," right? God. I have God and the internet sometimes. And I had to have this real true moment. I mean, we have the temporal logistics, but I also had these spiritual logistics. And literally turning to God was the only way, like, I could recalibrate, right? Because there's a serious recalibration when all of a sudden I don't have a job and it's a brand new language. The plugs are different in India. I couldn't even plug something in my own home. I couldn't drive. I couldn't plug in something. I didn't have a job. I mean, like, it was this like tsunami of change and like really getting in touch with like, who is God? Who am I as their child? And what does this new world look like? So we started having church. Church was a Sunday lesson on our front lawn, sitting in a circle. And we would discuss some topic that I would pick out, very universal, right? Because I've got a whole bunch of people with different beliefs. And one of my daughters was like, we're just not used to this. Like, I'm not sure we should have to sit here and listen to lessons on ethics because we're just not used to this. And I'm like, we're not used to this. Like, I've never sat on a front lawn on a Sunday morning and had a discussion and counted that as church, right? Like, this is not what church looks like. This is not what worship looks like for me. So there's a whole bunch of like what does this look like? What does this feel like? How do you fill in the gaps? I mean, this is way before COVID and home church, right? Like I was having home church a decade before home church, right? And so it was like, I can't even explain to you like literally how cutting down to bedrock and then rebuilding like that process. I had to learn to drive again, right? Like,
I
Yeah.
had bigger challenges
shut up.
because I asked my wife, you're shifting your whole self from US to India. There are things you're going to miss. What can I do that'll make you feel like you're okay? What do you need? And she turns around and she says, guacamole. So there are no avocados where I live. So I
No
had to start.
avocados in northern India.
So I had to get avocados from southern India to get
He
her
did.
guac.
Wow.
He actually brought in
Every 2-3
avocados.
months, I would find a way to get somebody coming from there, me traveling there. So I had bigger challenges to make sure my wife was
Guacamole,
guacamole.
right?
That's very
beautiful.
sweet.
Yeah.
McArthur, you've just mentioned all the divine intervention, but all of this must have been like just so wild. Like, did you ever just feel so like, how did I get here? And am I totally lost? And wonder if you're totally off the path? How did you,
I
how did you,
never think I was off the path because the answer had been so
Mhm.
stunningly clear. Like I got an
yeah,
answer that like, physically knocked me to the ground. Like it was a clear.
yeah.
Mess with the pagan, that's what happens.
That's what- um, but what I did have is I had moments where I didn't trust my heavenly parents, where I was like, you people are crazy. Like,
Yeah.
you put me here. You think this is a good idea? You think I'm strong enough for this? This is insane. How
Mhm.
did you really think I could do this? Right. I mean, I was used to being competent, right? I was used to knowing how to do things. I was an adult. And so all of a sudden to be in a place where I couldn't even like plug something in the wall gives you some humility to really turn your life to God and say, I need you to lift me and magnify me in ways that I never thought I was going to need, right? I need to be more brave, more energetic. And most of the time I'm told I'm a little bit too much, but to realize I was put in a situation where I needed to be more. And the only way to get that more was through God.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
Yeah, don't you find that sometimes when you get the really clear impressions, it's because you really needed to have them because the next chapter is quite difficult?
Right?
Sometimes it feels like a little bit of a
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm also curious, you seem like you felt very comfortable making a distinction between the church and then your relationship with your heavenly parents. And that's not always as easy for some people, right? For me, when it comes to questions like this, and especially not just the question of is it okay to marry a non-member or something, but like all of the compromises along the way, like things that I was told never to compromise on, for example, like church on Sunday. Like I can imagine like things like that that just would for me trigger this like, am I even okay in the eyes of the church? And am I
Mm.
still considered an active member? I can imagine myself questioning things like that. And you seem quite confident, but for those who feel like they need a little bit more permission from the church, what would you say to that?
Two things. One, as I would say, one of the most important aspects of life to cultivate is being a sovereign being.
Mm.
And by that, I mean you are a person who knows you can turn to God, get answers, and trust your answers. So, sovereign does not put you out of the realm of God. It actually firmly plants you with God, but it means that you absolutely trust yourself and your relationship to God. I literally think that's one of the most important aspects, characteristics, places in life you can cultivate, right? And so you're right. It's something that's one of my talents. I think I've cultivated a long time. I think my mother really helped this. But I think that if someone is struggling with this, one, I'd say that's worth cultivating, right? I would say that I was really lucky because I went into my stake president who'd been my bishop earlier. And I just said, look, this is crazy. I got to talk to you about this. And he was just incredibly loving. And he gave me a blessing and said, you're on your parents' path, right? Like,
Wow.
and then when I got to India, my records actually sat with the mission because I was outside of ward boundaries. And so here and there, I would meet with the mission president. And one time I was just like, this is the heart and this is this. And he goes, yep, it sounds like marriage. It sounds like life. Like he was just so utterly like calm in
That's
the
so
face of my
sweet.
like
Yeah.
existential like, am I a member if I'm only coming once a month? He was just
Yeah.
so calm. And like you felt like a kind of a wise grandfather. And so I think that between those two things of like being a sovereign being and having leaders who are really loving. So like if there's a leader who listens to this and hear this, like your job is to love that person. Right. Like I knew all the rules about me being in church, right? Like no one remind me of those rules, right? But to just be loving in the face of my like clear desire to honor God and honor my LDS faith and understand the parameters of what like just the sheer logistics, right? Vital. Also was when I started writing books. And so I had all this free time on Sunday, right? Like
Mhm.
when I was living in DC, I was a young women's president and I'd sometimes go to the singles ward. So I'd have 5 or 6 hours of church every week, plus meetings and like calling stuff. And so all of a sudden I had time on Sundays. And so that's when I started doing research and started writing the Girls Who Choose God series because all of a sudden I just called myself to like, okay, this is going to be my calling. I don't have a calling right now. So my calling is going to be to work on writing these books about women in the scriptures.
I just backing up just a little bit. I'm curious about what it was like for you I mean, you mentioned that MacArthur was the first you hadn't even heard of Mormonism before this, right? What kind of pagan spiritual answers were you receiving? I'm curious.
I have to step back. What you have to understand about Hinduism is that there is no set pattern, there's no set book, there is no structure to the religion. It's more about the karmic theory, do unto others as you want done.
Mhm.
And it's about being very present. And there are different mechanisms of that presence. And the idea is that you can reach what they would call Param Brahma, or the universal source of energy, which is you can reach it by faith. And you can have faith in anything. So you can have faith in a monkey god, and an elephant god, and a goddess. And till you surrender to that faith, there is a chance of merging into the eternal, very similar to Mormonism in many ways. And till your soul doesn't learn that, you keep getting born and learning and learning and learning till you eventually are able to understand, surrender, be present, and merge into nirvana, or the eternal, which is fundamentally energy. So that's the basic idea in Hinduism. What happened with me was at age 9, there were no good schools in my town. So I was sent to a boarding school, which was a Protestant Christian boarding school. That was my first insight into something called Christianity. I may have had friends here and there who went to church, but I had no idea about Christianity. And this was a lot of Christianity is about spreading the faith. And this was again one of those where we had to go to chapel, and we had to pray to this god which we had no clue about.
It was dark and
It was
dreary.
dark and dreary, and
Mhm.
it was old school British, so there was a lot of corporal punishment, caning and stuff like
Oof.
that.
Yeah.
My association with Christianity was really, I would say,
Poor.
traumatic. Not just
Yeah.
poor,
Yeah.
traumatic. I had
Wow.
trauma around Christianity. So forget Mormonism.
Mm.
The idea of Christianity itself was a little bit difficult for me. But at one point, my grandmother, as the kids grew, as my mother and her sisters grew, she started going to serve with Mother Teresa. They lived in Calcutta. And Mother Teresa became a big part of our lives. And what happened was that my grandfather became her right hand man. So anything administrative, anything to do with money went to him. He's 94, he's still alive, 95. And they still come to him for any big decision, the missionaries of charity. So one of my most profound memories growing up, and this is right, like the earliest I can remember is maybe 10 or 12, but the one significant one I have is 16, 17, and mother would just sit with us. And there was this woman that literally, you were her world. It was just that huge presence, this little woman who had such power. And I remember again walking away just like vibrating each time I would meet her, because she would just hold your hand, these wrinkly old fingers, and they would just hold you and look into your eyes and say, "Son, talk to me." So that was the other side that I had. But
His
overall,
grandfather used to say, I don't believe in anything, but I
yeah,
believe in Mother Teresa.
yeah, that's it.
Right.
That's
So
my,
Mm.
that kind
that's
of
Mm.
like
Wow.
in the
Yeah,
good.
you like a real encounter with holiness. Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
had those two sides, but I realized when after meeting my wife in my 30s that I keep telling my wife that the greatest, so in India you have this concept of dowry. The wife is supposed to get a dowry, right? So I said the greatest dowry I have is the people that you bring into my life. And I started meeting a lot of very interesting people through her, and Mormons and non-Mormons. But some of the nicest people I met were from the faith. What I was, as a business person, what I was truly fascinated with was this idea of volunteerism, right? Everybody was trying to be part of the faith and trying to volunteer their time, and the hierarchy could shift, and all of that was very interesting for me. I said, how do I run a business like this? How do you have such great SOPs in place? And
He loves the
handbooks. I'm like, how do you train people with that idea? But that said, so for me, the path to spirituality is very individual. And for me, the search it's been so beautiful because it brings in so many different ideas from different paths and different cultures and all of that. For now, I'm really exploring the Mayan culture, and it's amazing because I've made friends with these elders who are Mayan, and they've taken me to caves and ceremonies and how these fires change when the spirits appear, and there's so much beauty there. And once I remember I was walking and I went to a Sikh temple. The Sikhs are the guys with the turban, and one of the most, they call peaceful warriors. And it's again one of the very, very profound kind of religious paths. And I was seeking somebody to take me deeper. And I told the guy who I was conversing with that I'm looking for the right guru. So he said, do you even know what guru means? I said, yeah, somebody who can take me to the right path, a teacher. He looks at me, no, think of the term what guru means. So I said, huh. So he said, guru. I was like, okay, I've never thought of it like that. So he said, somebody or something that takes you from darkness to light. And that's what guru is. So guru is not a teacher, and guru is always within. You look for the guru within, not outside. And that became a very interesting path for me, and direction for me. And for me, it's been like really trying to be present. It's the desire of finding myself. So for me, it's not external. It's like, how do I go within and understand myself more, which again relates a lot to the kind of practice of going within and finding answers and seeking.
Mhm.
I would also say that one thing that has made our marriage successful so far is that neither one of us is trying to convert the other. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not secretly trying to convert Vade, right? Like, I'm
My
not.
mother-in-law tried hard, but
My mother.
he still has hopes.
Don't give up hope, honey. Right? Like,
She even gave me Book of Mormon. She first gave me a Book of Mormon in English. And I said, Mom, it's really tough for me to read this language, and it's a lot of time, and it's thin lettering. And she's like, okay, son. And the next time she got it to me in Hindi. I was like, okay, try it in Hindi. I was like, oh my gosh, the sweet woman.
Oh, sweet.
How do I explain to her that it's
well,
not
yeah,
really-
Mm.
I think curiosity really helps, right? So when we were first married and going to work in the family business, every time you get a new machine, every morning starts with a prayer on the temple ground. And so like this spirituality and this religiosity was completely ingrained more so in business than what it was in my business life in America, right? And so I think there's a lot of openness on both sides to say, okay, like I'm going to stand on the temple grounds, not LDS temple. I'm going to stand on the Hindu temple grounds at our factory, and I'm going to be respectful, and I'm going to learn the rules, right? I'm LDS, so I'm a rule follower, right? So I learned that I had to take off my shoes, and I learned when I had to cover my head, and I learned how to play by the rules so I could treat these people's faith with respect, because I feel sincere, deep respect for any faith. Like a person exercising faith, I feel respect for. And so I think there's a lot of that as well. Of like, I'm going to learn how to do this, right? And so Vade being able to quote hymn scripture, right? Like we have this, we've learned how to play in each other's worlds, right?
Yeah, but the rule
Mm.
follower is a little doubtful about.
I believe you mean conscientious. How about that one?
Yeah, but you're a rule follower to be respectful of another religion. How much of a rule follower you are otherwise is a question.
I'm conscientious.
She's a complicated woman.
Or, yeah.
She's sovereign. She is sovereign.
I'm sovereign.
For sure.
I love this. I love this highlighting. It's very clear from this whole discussion that you're both very curious and very respectful and open as well. I think I would say even like willing to be transformed by each other and by God. And it's really gorgeous to witness. And you mentioned um, not trying to convert each other, but I think some of our listeners might be curious about children and what you might recommend about
Mm.
approaching children when you share two faiths in your household.
So the child one has been tough for me actually. So, and
Mhm.
it's been much easier for my wife because I am non-denominational. What I would say is that I'm not aligned to one kind of thing. I'm more like free flowing. I'm a Mayan today, and I was baptized by this old Mayan woman when I was in Guatemala last time, and I can be a Buddhist monastery the next day and then go and study Islam and become a Sufi. So for me, it's, and I found so much beauty in these different paths, including Mormonism. So for me, it was a challenge when my child actually came to me. This is our biological child, and said, I want to be baptized. So I thought about it and I said, why does it not feel good? It was again one of these gut feelings. I was like, okay, the child wants this. Why does this just not sit right? So I went back to her and I went for a walk with her and I said, I'm totally okay with your choices in life. You decide what you want. But I would prefer if you just waited till 16 or 18. And then you're more conscientious. Just now, of course, your cousins are getting baptized, your friends are getting baptized. It's this big deal that is being made out of it. So you don't want to miss the party. So I understand that. But from my perspective, this would be what I would suggest. Of course, my child, being our child, turns around to me and said, I've heard your point of view. I'll think about it and I'll let you know at age 8.
Mhm.
All right.
What a
Wow.
stallion.
This is not
Amazing.
Sovereign.
parenting. I'll get it. I'll take it. And 2 days later, she comes back to me, says, I've thought about it. I would like to be baptized.
Mhm.
I was like, but then I talked to my wife. I said, this would even be a rift between you and me because, of course, she's being influenced by this. And my wife has never like been that you have
Mm.
to be a Mormon or anything. But of course, she goes to church with my wife and all that. So I had a hard kind of feeling. And I talked to some other friends and they were like, why are you so bothered about baptism? It's okay. She can still choose a different path in the future and that's fine. Said, I don't know. This has been my journey in life to not be singular in your idea and to have this exploration. So, and then my wife said, are you just biding time so that at 16 you can tell her no again? I said, no, I'm not. But in a way, I am, right? Because I'm just postponing it. So, in the end, the question became again similar to what she was saying before about some subject. But what is my role? My role is to love my daughter and to celebrate with her. And so it became eventually that was what was important. And when she brought up the third time,
Oh,
when can
not
I
third
do
time.
it?
She brought it every 2 weeks for 10
For you, to
months.
you, not to me.
Yes.
Mm.
So yeah, so then when she finally said,
Papa.
I would really like to be baptized, I said, okay, great, let's do it. What's the dress going to be? What's this going to be? What can I do for you? What can I wear? And she chose my clothes. And then we went out
The
and
first
did it.
counselor who interviewed our daughter for baptism said he'd never met a child who's so well prepared for baptism. And I
Wow.
said, well, because not many children spend 10 months defending their choice. I mean, Zara spent 10
Yeah.
months telling Vade, like,
Yeah,
why she cared about
yeah,
Jesus, why she wanted to do this, why she knew their heavenly parents loved her.
yeah.
Now, can
Yeah.
I just backing up a little bit for clarity? One of the big questions that people say about interfaith marriage is like, oh, yeah, it's all going to sound nice when you're in love, but just wait till you have kids and then you're really going to like hate each other or whatever. But it sounds like you had some kind of agreement before where you were going to just let what happens. Like, how did you talk about?
Mhm.
It almost ended our courtship.
Mm.
Oh,
Pushed it.
But
really?
Yeah.
We had big fights. This is where the third Nephi angel in the gold convertible comes in.
was hoping we'd circle back.
Yeah.
Because
Give me
I
that
always knew they
convertible
drove
story.
convertibles.
Right?
yeah, it's a little bit of a sacrosanct side of story. So yeah, we talk about it. Yeah,
Do sacrosanct and humor at the same
okay.
time. So we were at a place where we were fighting big, fat fights. And they were basically around two things: his inability to see the damage that his ex-wife was creating and how I
Mm.
didn't want to spend my entire life like pointing it out. And the other was children. And what do we do in this kind of scenario? And we're in Sedona. And we'd gone here because we were curious and we'd heard about the vortexes. And we go in to this town, and Bade said, I want to go to one of these bookstores.
So we are in this bookshop, and I like to talk to everyone, right? And my wife, when she's not in a good mood, she likes to talk to everyone too. But when she's not in a good mood, it's boom, and she's not listening. And I'm talking to the woman in the bookshop, and this man walks in wearing all white with like he's tall and he's like shiny, and he's got this like hair and was he blonde hair,
curly hair to his shoulders.
So anyways, he comes in and
he looked like a Freeburg painting. Let's just be clear.
But okay, so anyway, so then he comes in and we start chatting, and I'm like, he said, I have time this afternoon, I can take you. So I'm like, oh, that'll be amazing. He's like, okay, let me grab something and come and meet you to this particular coffee shop. And we're like, okay. And the huckleberry shakes are great there. Okay. So we go there, and this guy is somebody, if he walks into a place, there is no way anybody can forget him. So it's just this huge presence. So we keep waiting and he doesn't turn up. And we're like, okay. And then because he's told us about this place really with so much familiarity, we go and ask the people if they said, no, they've never met anybody like that. And in comes this gold convertible with this guy who's changed completely. And he's wearing a t-shirt of Ganesha. Do you know Ganesha, the elephant god?
Yeah.
So he's wearing a t-shirt with a big Ganesha.
Ganesha is the overcomer of obstacles.
It's
and
his
the
god of
in the
good
pantheon.
Luck. But
and to be clear, this is a third Nephite. This is one of the three Nephites.
That's
is wearing a Ganesha t-shirt.
My mother calls him the third Nephite. Yes.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Okay. But this is incredible.
And he drills some serious sense into me, like serious sense. Like it's like he knows our past lives, he knows us, he knows the language we've been talking to each other, he knows the words
we had using. Some words there, like
I was like, she's planted him really well. Like she's even coached him on the language that we use with each other, the words that we use with each other. Yeah. But it was just so profound for me because he could see so many things from my life that I was not seeing, and my wife was trying to point out, but she couldn't point it out in such a clear kind of way.
What he basically said, and this is a message that's applicable to everyone who doesn't have a gold convertible show up, right? But like applicable to everyone is, he said, quit fighting. Yeah. Quit fighting. Is aware of you. I mean, it's like the sparrow idea, right? Which always makes me cry. But he's just like, God is aware of you, knows what is happening here. You guys have this precious gift of life together. Quit fighting and ruining it.
No, actually, what he said was, you've had many lifetimes together, and this is dessert.
This is dessert.
Enjoy it.
He said, like,
whoa.
He turned to Vade and he said, these are her gifts. Yeah. Quit being mad at her for exercising her gifts. Yeah. Right. And he turned to me and he said, you have to understand what he's gone through and have patience for him coming through this process. I mean, he basically called us both to repentance in the most loving, jovial, 6'7" blonde guy kind of way. Right. But it was super fascinating because the lessons of that have really stayed with us. Before we got married, we did not resolve what would happen with kids. In fact, we got to the point where we're like, we're not going to marry each other because we can't resolve this. It was left unresolved, even getting into marriage. But what we carried with us was this like mutual appreciation and the like, quit fighting, right? Which doesn't mean you don't have differences of opinions about things still. That's fair. But the snarliness that we are bringing to the table needed to dissolve. And so I think that's the lesson that we could share with someone is like, you will not get all the answers. You may not agree. You may have to figure things out. It may still be bumpy, even 8 years, 13 years later, right? And so like we've been married now 13 years and our 8-year-old just got baptized. And so like that is still bumpy for us. That has not been resolved. And yet we still know that we're supposed to be here.
My child is teaching me the lessons that I need to learn. So it's okay. The 9-year-old is drumming it in.
I think that one of the themes of this conversation feels for me that your spiritual guidance and your sovereignty, like you were saying, supersedes the known or laid out path My favorite stories of people falling in love tend to be the messy ones these days. I mean, I've always liked them, but the ones where people made like my parents, for example, they had some rocky times. Like my mom had some moments where like she was anxious and made some choices that could have ended the relationship. Like she panicked and broke up with my dad when it felt like things were getting really serious. There's also a story where there was a time where she was dating another man named Bob because my dad's name is Bob. I think she was dating 3 Bobs, just a lot of Bobs in the
Oh my
70s.
Bob one, Bob two,
But
Bob three.
she walked into an evening event and the other Bob was there, and she dropped my dad's hand and walked in front of him like she didn't know him, and I love this story. I love everything
No,
about it because she
it's
couldn't
so
screw it
human.
up. You know what I mean? But there were moments where fear was coming in and there was so much grace. And I think that there's just something here for me in this conversation as well. If it's going to be not straightforward, you're going to be able to figure it out. And there are not rules about like, you cannot make this happen. If God is telling you you can, you can.
Yeah,
Period.
Mother Teresa saying, like many of her great sayings, it goes something like, God only gives you what you can handle. I just wished God didn't trust me so much.
I
right?
feel that deeply. That got me right in
Yes.
the sternum.
Yeah. It just feels like interfaith relationships are like the Wild West when it comes to things. But I think it's also worth saying how, like,
Yeah.
any marriage in so many ways is an interfaith marriage. Sometimes I meet church members, I'm like, I don't feel like we belong to the same religion at all, you know? I, yeah. And
She can't read the scriptures with her husband because they have too strong of different ideas.
wow.
Because I was
Yeah.
mourning that I couldn't share more with this person. I wanna share the things that matter to me.
Mm.
I wanna share the insights I've read. I wanna share the things that, like, spark my soul, and she's like, "Psh, psh, psh." Right? Like, I don't even do that with my LDS husband, right? And so this moment,
Yeah.
we set these hard rules about this
Mhm.
and understanding that, like,
It's not always like that, right? And, like, I think sometimes we just like, we're reassured by things lining up on paper. It looks like there's gonna be shortcuts to all of this hard work, and whether it's baptism or a million other things, kids are always gonna do stuff that probably make parents fight in exactly the same way or be like, "Oh, I don't feel good about this."
Absolutely.
Like, it could be a million things. It's real
That's
life either way.
Well, and the
Yeah.
personal revelation that you received as well, the all the spiritual guidance that
Yeah.
it's good to remember that it can happen lots of ways. I'm in the film industry, and it's one of those things where there is no set path. And you can look at somebody else and say like, "Well, this worked for them," and you can try and work the YouTube or TikTok algorithm or like there's so many different stories, but you literally have no choice but to walk your own path. If you're feeling pulled to or called to something, you've got to just do it and deal with the
Yeah.
fact that you don't get certainty. Like, I love the point about having you didn't have certainty about what you were gonna do with kids, and guess what? It still worked out because you
yeah,
were walking your path and you knew you were. And I
yeah.
just think there's nothing more valuable than that.
Here's the other thing that's been really served us well is that neither one of us believes in mediocrity. And so
Mm.
want a mediocre marriage.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If you don't want a mediocre marriage, married to anyone of the same faith or not, you are going to have to make a regular, consistent choice to choose that marriage and choose that partner and choose that place over and over and over again. Because it's really easy to not make that choice. Like,
Yeah.
very simple, right? Like your husband does something, he would never irritate me. But let's just say hypothetically, your husband does something to irritate you. And like it's really easy to turn away from him and go and be like, I'm gonna be just over here. Right. And sometimes you need to do that. But to like choose and say, nope, I'm gonna stay and redirect. I'm going to come back to the table. I'm going to reinvest here. I'm going to choose this person again. And so I think I'm not saying that our marriage is any harder than any others or any easier than any others or any more glorious than any others. Like marriage is marriage, right? But I think to say, like, if you're going to choose this path, if you're going to choose to create with a person, it's going to take serious oomph. And I
Mm.
think that we've had this amazing journey of like things rolling out for us, but we've also had to say, do we want to be here? Is this
Yeah.
really what we choose? And do we choose it again? Because we're not the same people we were when we first got married. So do I still choose this? Does he still choose this? Right? And those are like ongoing choices, right? I mean, we're never going to bring up the big D divorce word, and that's fine because that's on a big scale. But like on a little scale, every time I walk into the kitchen where my husband's cooking dinner, because that's what he does and that's his job in our family contribution. Every time I walk in the kitchen where he's cooking dinner, he turns around and goes, "Hi." I was just like it makes me giggle every time, right? Like, and he gets it from his dad.
Yeah.
His dad would always greet him as if he was just delighted to see him.
Oh.
That's where he picked up this like characteristic from, but he didn't always do that in our marriage. This is a more recent thing, behavior or characteristic.
I always did it with our dogs. Hey,
That's
how are you, Snee?
That's so great. That's marriage in a nutshell. But like,
God make me the person my dog thinks I am.
exactly. But the
Nice.
fact that, like, recently, and I don't know when you decided to make this choice, but I'd say, like, in the last year. So we're married, like, 13 years, and a year ago or so, I noticed all of a sudden that he greets me when I come into the room, right? That is a significant choice to say, "I'm going to respect that this person matters," right?
Yeah.
And something as small as that is a choice that rolls you into the marriage instead of rolling you out of it, right? To a mediocre marriage place. Right? But that hasn't been there our whole marriage. And so I think, again, understanding that it's an ongoing choice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like one of the benefits of an interfaith marriage could be that there are fewer assumptions made and possibly things taken for granted because so much needs to be discussed and unpacked. So a lot of
Yes.
intentionality. That seems really, really beautiful.
Yes,
Such a
absolutely.
great point, Mallory. I do have just like one last burning question. How did you handle conversations about sex before marriage? And if you had different views on that, how you came together on that issue?
Yeah, that's not easy, but I had been dating for 20 years by the time I met him. I had dated both LDS and non-LDS, and so I'd had that conversation a lot. It's never fun, I would say, but I was comfortable putting that conversation on the line. Like, we started joking, like, "Is it date 1 or date 2 where you lay down, like, 'Not gonna have sex with you?'" Like,
Yeah.
that's quicker, like, what like, how quickly does that come up, right? But I also knew pretty early on that, 1, we were in for the long haul. Right? And so this was going to be something that I wanted to come to into it like long haul investment, right? Because there had been some times in my life where I'd made short-term choices that were not very respectful to me or the person I was across from.
Mhm.
And I knew when I was being cheap, right? So I knew that this was not a person I wanted to treat in a cheap, short way, that this was a long haul kind of a thing. So that was part of it. He also lived on the other side of the planet.
Helpful, actually. I'm gonna take that one as a
Thumbs
note.
up.
Perhaps I should be doing more interfaith marriages or not marriages,
Like
more more long
International,
distance,
international
international.
courtship
dating.
situation.
I recommend.
Because, of course, mid-30s, I come from a more freewheeling kind of background and no kind of judgment around these ideas. In fact, I would say even unnatural, that you would want to really connect with this person and you cannot, because there's this boundary that is drawn and then you have to hold back. So for me, it was extremely difficult to
You
take
also
that
had some
in.
landmines.
Yeah, I also had some landmines around sexuality with my ex-wife because I got married so early, and she was 4 years older than me, and she had had a lot of experience, and I had none. And then, of course, there was other issues that went on in that marriage, and that led me to feeling very rejected sexually. So again, there was this situation where it was a sexual rejection in my mind. So for me, it was very difficult to take that, not just physically. Physically is probably easier, but more emotionally, like, why am I being put in this place? I remember talking to my brother around then, and he was like, dude, please, please, please do not get into another marriage without physical intimacy, because you haven't done this, and like you get into another one and you realize there's no compatibility. So even those things were happening. But on the other side, it was really beautiful because in a way there was this woman who I was so connected to, and she was saving something special for us. So that was the beauty side of it, except in that moment that you're not able to see the beauty side of it. It's only when you're away from the hormones flowing can you actually
Mhm.
understand that side of it. So overall, it was extremely tough as a non-believer. And I came from this belief system, which was like no suppression is good. Because suppression,
Mhm.
you suppress it in one place, it comes out in a different way. So suppression of energy is not great. It is better to channelize, and even to go beyond sex, you have to go through sex. So that's the background of
Totally.
Interesting.
in order to go beyond sex, you have to understand and go through. So both from an angle of physicality and from an angle of the belief system, it was tough for me to handle that part.
I probably already know the answer to this question, but what kept you from throwing up your hands? You know, especially when your brother's like, please don't do this.
I think the connect was too deep. So it
Yeah.
was,
I was a
there's,
great kisser.
I don't know if that's
It says a lot.
that may have gone through my head a few times, but it was too strong right from that moment of watching her
Yeah.
walk as light. I would be distrustful of the universe for this. So for me, everything happens at the right time, at the right place. And true belief and surrender to the universe is beautiful. So the idea that there is a divine force that is guiding your life has been very central to my being. And it just felt that this is the place I need to be. And this is
Mm.
the person I need to be with. And yeah, thankfully I did stick it out.
And I think that that held us both in different ways, right? So there are parts about our courtship that absolutely sucked. And so him saying that this was tough and hard, I think is really valid. But because we were so clear that even though I brought part of the sucky situation, he brought this part of the sucky situation,
Mhm.
like that we understood that this unit is how we were going to ride it out, right? And the power of that unit is stronger than the power of the individual. And so like that unit was going to get us to hold us through the hard, right? Do you think that's
Yeah.
true?
Lovely.
I wasn't thinking that clearly, but it was more like, if I think about that time, it was just that it was clear to me. This was where, like I had told her right in the beginning, we are to be together. You will take time to peel the layers. That's
When you
you
get
know.
to the middle of the onion, you're
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah.
know.
So yeah, it's just peeling. The rest is just peeling the layers. We have to be together. That's clear. So the rest will be peeling the layers, and we
And that
both had
was
to do that.
and
Of
that was
course.
one of the
And
layers.
yeah, that was a tough layer, though. Yeah.
Mm,
Thank
yeah.
you guys so much for sharing your story. It's such a rich blend of like stark transcendent clarity with like chaotic mess
Mhm.
with difficult things you could accept, difficult things you still don't understand. And it's just such a beautiful and real story. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And I think this is
Really.
going to mean, yeah, it's meant a lot to me to hear. And also just from the LDS perspective, McArthur, at this stage of life, like I was joking with Mallory earlier, I was like, I'm not even on a plan B for life. I feel like I'm already on like a plan W or something. It's just so easy to feel lost. But just the reminder that when we really need guidance and we're trying to align ourselves with God, that we'll feel that in the way that we need to feel it. I
And
really
I
believe that.
and I also think like I have a good imagination and I have a husband who's a visionary. And
Mm.
yet neither one of us came up with this. Right?
Yeah.
And so if you're on plan W, but you feel like you've been following God's plan, like that plan is going to be more abundant than what you came up with. Right? I
Yeah.
truly believe in God's abundance. I mean, I have a friend who married later and was not able to have biological children, and she really mourns the loss of that. Right? And so I don't want to just be like, no, but it's easy. It'll all work out. Right? But she also says her marriage is more abundant than what she had ever dreamt of, right? And that she
Mm.
has amazing grandkids now that she gets to just adore. And so yeah, I think that part of trusting God is and trusting the definition. Like for me, part of the definition of deity is abundance, right? Like God does not operate in a scarcity context. And so if I'm trusting that abundance, then I will believe that the abundance is possible and is coming to me, and what will come will be bigger and grander than what I was. So even if I felt lost or felt like, why me? Why now? Why not me? Right? Like, I think that like believing in the abundance of God held me in a way that's really significant.
Amen. Hallelujah. It's such a cool story. Tip to tail. I love that story. You two. Thank you so much for your time.
We don't have a tail yet. We're still working on the tail.
Oh my gosh. You're right. I didn't mean to condemn you both to death. That was not my intention. No, you made my world bigger today. And thank you for doing that.
Thank you everyone for listening. If you want to continue the conversation with us, we've got a couple of options for you. You're welcome to email us with any feedback or topic suggestions at hello@thesoloists.org. You can also follow us on Instagram. Our account handle is the.soloists. And if you're not on Instagram, don't let us give you FOMO. Enjoy being unplugged from social media. Thanks everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.